specific questions that we have during the webinar registration, because it allows us to target what we're presenting to those of you on the call. I wanted to have Pat introduce herself and also provide a little bit of background about why Zingerman's Human Resource Department is now called the Department for People, because I think it frames really well the approach to employees and their relationship to the organization that we have here at Zingerman's. And of course, the interviewing process is a piece of that and an early part of setting the stage for that relationship. So Pat, why are you D for P?
Thanks Maggie. And it's so good to be here with all of you. Just a little bit, tiny little bit about me. I've been in human resources my whole career. I've been with Zingerman's for going on 7 years now. And when I came in, we were human resources. And the vision of Department for People was actually created in a ZingTrain seminar when I attended as an attendee, the Creating a Vision of Greatness. And that vision was all about the Human Resource Department really shifting, making a paradigm shift to really be all about people and all about serving the people within Zingerman's. And anybody that knows HR knows that we have to wear a lot of different hats, some of them popular within the organization, some of them not so popular within the organization. But we really shifted our mindset to really how can we serve Zingerman's? How can we serve the managing partners? How can we serve the managers? And how can we serve staff? And so we created this vision and have been working on it for the last few years. And I have to say, the name change to Department for People has really had a pretty profound impact on us within the organization.
Great. In terms of the overall approach that we take in thinking about employees here at Zingerman's, and this is actually the whole structure of the Working with Zing seminar that Pat and I co-teach. The next session of that seminar is June 17th and 18th. So if this is a topic you're really passionate about and you don't get the level of detail you want in a 1 hour webinar, join us there. I know that there are quite a few people who are on the call who've been to that seminar in the past and are brushing up on it, because of course these are things we're always dealing with. But we think in terms of the employment life cycle, the first stage, hiring the right people, getting the right people into our organization. Stage 2 is helping them succeed while they're here. And then stage 3 is assisting departing staff, because realistically, most people aren't going to be with us their entire lives. And whether they're moving on because of their own life changes or because they weren't a good fit with the organization, we think it's really important to have that departure end as well as possible, because who knows, they may move back to town and we end up interviewing and hiring them again. Within stage 1, hiring the right people, there's obviously more than just interviewing. In fact, there are 3 very important steps that come before interviewing. The first, we think, is defining the job, being really clear about the position that you're hiring for. Then sourcing and recruiting a good range of candidates, following a standard process in how you review the applications you get and narrow them down, and then interview effectively. In discussing what we wanted to talk about today, we're focusing specifically on the interview. Pat's going to go through some tips on that. Some of those will refer back to a couple of these earlier stages, but I just want to remind people that the interview is only one piece of the hiring process.
Thanks, Maggie, because I think that is really a very, very important point to make. Interviewing is certainly a key piece of the process, but its effectiveness is really in large part going to be defined by the steps that come before and the steps that come after. And I'm going to put a plug in for preparation, because the more that you can be prepared and take the time up front, I think the better the results you're going to yield. And if you think about, because I mean, I talk to managers all the time about this, and you're always trying to do a bunch of different things, time's always short. But if you think about how much time you've spent on that one person who turned out to be a really bad hire and dealing with that, then that preparation doesn't seem nearly so bad or nearly so onerous. So I'm going to focus on the preparation for an interview and then actually conducting an interview today. Inviting the top candidates. So that says that you've gone through a process to narrow down a number of candidates that you've reviewed based on their application. I'm going to suggest often phone screening, depending on what the position is. I mean, if you're looking at an entry level, sort of a retail job, you might not. What our people do a lot of times is they collect and they talk to the person for 5 or 10 minutes, and that becomes the equivalent of a phone screen. But you're starting with a broader pool of candidates, because the more you start with, the more you're going to be able to have a healthy number of people to consider, because at each step of the process, you're going to lose candidates. And what you don't want to happen is that you get down and you don't end up having enough candidates and you have to start all the way back at the beginning. And what I see actually often happens is when you get too few, you end up settling for that candidate that really isn't the ideal candidate, but you really don't feel like you have the time or the energy to start all the way back. And that's sometimes where you get into trouble. So you start by inviting top candidates in. And then in preparation for those interviews, you develop the interview questions that you're going to use. And I ideally, again, depending on the level of the position, and I'm speaking now more for experienced hires versus like that brand new retail person or an entry level person. I like to see more than one exposure to that candidate. So maybe a first and a second interview. Again, that's going to depend on the what's at stake with this position. The more that's at stake, the more you're going to spend some time in terms of really spending time with those candidates. So a management candidate, you're probably for sure going to have 2 interviews. You want to develop consistent interview questions that you're going to ask every candidate. Okay, and so some people, in some of the feedback we got was, do I really have to ask the same questions? And this is what I'm going to suggest. Develop questions that are going to give you the information to make a good decision about taking some subset of those candidates to the next step in the process. Okay, and remember, you can always ask follow-up questions, clarifying questions for specific candidates to make sure that you understand. But giving everybody the same questions just ensures fairness. It ensures that you're going to be able to defend your process if somebody comes back and thinks they've been treated unfairly, because you have a standard process that you're using. There's several different kinds of questions that you can consider, and we've listed 3 here: behavioral questions, closed-ended questions, open-ended questions. I like best, I spend the most time on the first and the third. Behavioral questions are really great when you're trying to get at characteristics that the person needs to have to be effective in the job. So those are the tell me about a time when kind of questions. It's getting them to tell you how they behave in certain situations. Closed-ended questions are really more to like collect specific data. We actually sometimes will ask some level of closed-ended question in our pre-screening process. We have an online application process where we can ask pre-screening questions. Like in hiring a payroll person, I've done it more than once. And so I've gotten really good at knowing what it takes for that person to be successful. So a closed-ended question is, do you have the specific experiences that I'm looking for? Okay, so that's more where a closed-ended question is going to come in. And then open-ended questions are going to come in. That's going to really help you have a dialogue with that candidate. And I'm a big proponent of making an interview a conversation. The more comfortable the candidate is, the more likely they are going to share with you candid things. Okay, so from an employer perspective, it's always best to keep the questions job related. But we all know that from a fit perspective, you want to know a little bit more about that candidate. And so asking open-ended questions where you're getting them talking, and you're framing something about the job, and then you're getting them talking, is going to help them talk to you about what's important to them, and it's going to help give you information to assess that person, not only in terms of their skills and their experience, but also in terms of the fit to the organization. And then the legal piece, I've sort of touched on that. You can go online. I know because I've done it myself. There's a number of things if you just Google legal interview questions, where a lot of times it's how you frame it, and there are certain things that are okay to ask. And there are other things that are really not okay to ask. So I really recommend that you look at those and make sure that you're asking things in a certain way. And a good listing of legal questions could give you that. Generally speaking, what you want to think about is, how does this question relate to the job? Okay, and I know that we all try to figure out, is the person a good fit to the job? And you just want to make sure that when you're asking the questions, that you are really thinking about what are the things that are going to help me evaluate whether this person has the skills needed to do the job. The fit piece is going to come in terms of how they answer the question and how they interact. How they interact during the interview process. And I think we can flip to the next page. Because as you're, again, still preparing, you're going to arrange the logistics. You're going to figure out how long the interview is for and who's going to participate in the interview. If you're in a situation where you're doing a first interview and a second interview, first interviews are usually shorter than maybe an hour or 2 hours. They're talking to a couple of the key people that are going to be either the decision maker or key inputs to that decision. And then the second interview, and that's sort of like the next level of pre-screening. Then the next level, that second interview, is where it typically is it's a broader interview where they're talking to more people, more than just the person that they're going to report to. I encourage you to consider including peers in the interview process, people that are going to be peers to this position. I like to do it frequently in an informal way, like in a second interview where they're going to be there for a few hours, potentially letting that person go to lunch just with the peers, because peers have a very big vested interest in getting somebody that can do the job and can fit in with the group. And they'll often give you a perspective that the manager might not have you to or consider. So thinking about that also, like when I hire somebody in the Department for People, we always include customers, some of our key customers in our interview process, because we know that the people that work in the Department for People are going to have to really be successful working with our customers. So, for the position you're hiring for, who are the key people that they need to be able to work with, and how can you get some of those people involved in the interview process?
And Pat, just jump in, when you're talking about customers for the Department for People,
Those are our managers, those are our employees, those are our managing partners. When we do interviewing, I actually haven't gone down to the employee level. I hadn't really thought about that. We definitely got managers involved and several managing partners. When I myself interviewed at Zingerman's, in my interview process, I met all the managing partners. I interviewed with probably 5 or 6 managing partners as a part of my process because this job, whatever the job is, it isn't going to perform in a vacuum. It's going to perform within the context of the organization. So the more you can make your process a process that is going to show that person what the context they're going to work in, the easier it's going to be for them to understand whether they're a good fit, and the easier it's going to be for you to see how well they do in that kind of environment. I really believe that the whole hiring process is a two-way process because fit is two-way. For somebody really to fit in our organization, they have to be happy here. So if it's not a good fit for them, it's not going to be a good fit for us. So I always encourage people to make it a two-way process when I talk to them. The other thing is I really believe in what I call truth in recruiting. And as we get into the conducting an interview, we talk about, talking about what it's like to work in the organization. Be realistic. Don't necessarily tell them the absolute worst day they're ever going to have. I'm not saying that. But also tell them what it's like. Because again, you want to give your candidates enough information that they can make a good decision about whether your job is the right fit for them. So let's just talk for a minute about conducting the interview. The first is to open, to welcome the person, to make them feel comfortable. This is like you're walking them back to the office, or you're getting them a cup of coffee, or whatever the case may be. It's really funny. I remember training managers. I remember one time, not at Zingerman's, where I was trying to help a group get better at interviews because they weren't having a lot of luck with it. So I just sat in an interview, and they had about 4 or 5 people around the table. And I'm telling you, it felt like an interrogation. So when the candidate left, I just had a conversation about making it friendly. You're going to work with this person. So making it friendly, the more at ease they feel, the more they are going to open up to you and tell you what goes between the lines in terms of whether they're a good candidate or not. Then the next 3 steps, the ask and assess, the tell and the sell. We have listed sort of as steps, but I really think in a good interview, you're kind of weaving it in and out throughout the course of the interview. So the ask is you're going to ask questions, and you're going to listen to the answers, and you're going to make some assessments. I kind of encourage the assessment after. I try to make the interview mostly about collecting information and jotting down, if you do, have some thoughts about what the person's saying, jotting that down, because when you're doing more than one interview, it's really easy to confuse. Was that the second person or the third person? So good notes is a really important thing. The tell and the sell is about telling them about the business, telling them about the job, and then selling, quote, selling the job and the organization to the person. And again, the more it can be a conversation, the more that you can talk to them and hear what they say, and then tell them something about the organization based on what they're saying. That's going to be much more impactful than just having a canned speech that you tell every candidate about it, because different people are going to have different things that they're really looking for, and your job is to try to figure out what are they really looking for, and is it realistic that we can really give them what they're looking for. And then in the closing part, that's where you always want to make sure you give people an opportunity to ask questions. And asking questions can be kind of telling. What are they asking about? What are they interested about? That's going to give you some sense of where they're coming from. And so you're going to, of course, want to make sure you answer those questions. And you also want to make sure before they walk out of the room that they understand what the next steps are. And my personal encouragement is whatever time frame you have, double it for them. So if you think that you're going to get back to candidates in a week, tell them two. Because the reality is interviewers always have a lot of different things that they're responsible for, and it always takes longer than you think it's going to take. And if you tell them two, and you get back to them in one, they're going to feel special, and they're going to think it's like, oh, great. So that's sort of the managing expectations in the interview process.
I think that's a really, really important point because my experience is that if you're the interviewer or the hiring person, you feel like the process is going way more quickly than the interviewees who are waiting to hear. So, it's been a long time since I was on that other side. But I haven't forgotten that. And so I think Pat's point is really, really an important one, to be really explicit. You will, the next time you're going to hear from us will be in X amount of time. So don't worry if you haven't heard before then. You will hear one way or another about whether you're moving on to the next step within 2 weeks or whatever the time frame is. And the last time we hired here at ZingTrain, I plotted out when I thought we would be making the final decision, and I let people know, and it was more than a month out, and there were people that were sort of taken aback by that and just said, I'm just being realistic with you, and I totally understand that might not work for you, but I want you to understand. I just want you to know what's going on here.
And in that kind of case, what I try to do when it is a little bit farther out is I try to say, what I would ask for you to do is if you have something else that comes up in the interim, could you just give me a call and let me know before you make any final decisions? And then that gives you an opportunity, if that's like your by far #1 candidate and you don't want to lose them, that you might somehow adjust the schedule to accommodate for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to interject with a quick question because it's really topical to what you're saying right now. The question that came up was, if you tell people 2 weeks and they call a few times after 1 week, do you take that as a negative?
That's a great question. I was actually thinking about that.
It's so funny. With all my family and acquaintances, I'm the HR guru, so people always call me and I get these checks. Well, they told me I was going to hear a week and I haven't. What do I do? I think it's a judgment. If somebody is calling every single day and they didn't pay attention to what you said, I would say that's somewhat of a red flag.
Right.
I really would. I wouldn't say it's a red flag that they automatically get pitched as a candidate, but I would definitely look at that, and then as you're going through the rest of the process, see how they behave.
Right. On the other hand, if someone contacted me with a specific question, here's something that occurred to me that I forgot to ask when I was there in the interview, and I only heard from them once, that would be a positive for me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think it really depends on the content.
And
the frequency.
That's
a great, another thing they forgot like every day.
Right.
And then we're sort of over the edge. So there are a few different things that we wanted to address that didn't fit in that overall scheme. So we want to hit them here. Multiple interviews, you kind of touched on.
I did touch on that. You have to evaluate, how big the process is, how big of a process you need to really make a good decision, and make it specific to the job. I can tell you when I'm hiring a professional, I wouldn't consider not having 2 interviews. I wouldn't. I cannot tell you how frequently that the top candidate after the first interview frequently slips behind after the second interview. It just is the way it is. You get a different perspective on somebody after meeting with them more than one time. The tilt-a-whirl,
before we go to tilt-a-whirl,
okay.
Because that is a way to do multiple interviews, but I would say I believe our experience, if you talk to the hiring managers across the ZCAP, even those who are hiring frontline positions, always want more than one. It might not be a more than one formal interview, but more than one person talks to that candidate. Whether, as Pat was saying before, if they are turning in an application in person, which actually is happening a lot less now because we have the online applications. The person who accepted the application engages them for a couple of minutes and might jot down some notes. Now that it's all online, there's typically somebody doing some level of phone screening before people are called in for an interview. And so that is, again, an opportunity for a second opinion and impression.
And be strategic with who does those interviews. I really highly encourage it to be more than just the manager. The manager is going to come from one perspective, and it's certainly a very important perspective. It is not the only important perspective, however.
Right.
And that sort of takes us to the tilt-a-whirl. That's our Zingerman's term for having a second interview with multiple candidates. It's a little challenging to schedule, but it is a wonderful way to collect a lot of data in a relatively short period of time. And basically how a tilt-a-whirl works is you come up with your final candidates. They've been through, we do tilt-a-whirls usually for management, sometimes a more senior professional staff position, of which we don't have a ton, but those are the kinds of jobs that we do tilt-a-whirl for. And what we do is we get it down to the top 2 to 4 candidates. We like at least 3. And then we have the same number of interview teams as we have candidates. So if there's 3 people, there's 3 interview teams. The interview teams are 2 people, and we come up with standard questions in certain areas, topic areas like customer service, financial knowledge if it's a financial position. Different areas, initiative. I'm just trying to think. Leadership, some of those kind of
or organizational fit. I mean, specifically culture.
That would be another. And we come up with, and they're very frequently behavioral questions. Tell us about a time when that gets at it. And what happens is each interview team interviews each candidate. So what you have by the end is you have, like, if it's 3 people, 3 rounds of interviews, and the interviewees actually stay in the same room, and then the interview teams go to each of the candidates in 3 successive interviews. So by the end of it, all 6 interviewers have talked to all 3 candidates. And so now
and have asked the exact same questions each time. So if when I was on a tilt-a-whirl team for a new accountant at Zingerman Service Network, I was part of the customer service / cultural fit team, and we were asking all 3 candidates. I was asking the same questions. So I'm seeing how they react on those questions. Quite appropriately, there were other accountants who were looking at their accounting qualifications.
Absolutely. And so what ends up happening in usually a 3 or 4 hour period, usually in those interviews we keep them to about 35 to 45 minutes. So they're not super long interviews. We always lose Zingermans. We always make sure there's food halfway through. And that's a really nice informal time to connect with the candidates. And then when they're done, they all go home. And then all the interviewers meet with the hiring manager, and there's a debrief. And during that debrief, we talk about, the pros and cons, the concerns and the enthusiasms about each candidate. And usually, I'm not going to say this 100% of the time, but usually that's all consultative input, and the hiring manager ultimately makes the final hiring decision. What we try to do is, when we know we're going to have a tilt-a-whirl, let the candidates know really early on in the process. It's very interesting. We've actually had sometimes candidates back out because they didn't want to use, they didn't want to go through the process. And the way I look at that is, that is so much a part of how Zingerman's does business, that if you can't think about doing that, you're probably not a great fit for the organization.
One thing I did when I was the last interview process I did here at ZingTrain, I actually had scheduled, I knew when we would do the tilt-a-whirl. So when I was doing that close of the interview and saying what I said, we will eventually be narrowing down the top candidates to come for a tilt-a-whirl on this date.
Right.
So it was a month from now, but I figured give people the opportunity. Another thing I wanted to mention about the tilt-a-whirl, because I think it's an important piece. Pat mentioned that we provide food. We also get everybody together, all the candidates and all the interviewers at the beginning, just kind of sitting around the table, introduce ourselves to each other and explain the whole process. And this is an opportunity to watch candidates interact with their competition. And it's not like a shark kind of thing, but it's just how do they hold up in this situation. It can be a little awkward. We don't try and make it awkward, but we're just letting people know what's going on. And then we take a break in the middle, and that's a more casual, just go to the bathroom, get some coffee.
That works for us. Think about your organization and how you tend to work as an organization, and think about how you can infuse some of that realism into the interview process. It might be different than what we do, but the tilt-a-whirl for us gives us an opportunity to sort of give them an experience of what Zingerman's is like. And then it's a nice segue into the final, which is trial chefs, because I never had trial chefs. I've never seen trial chefs anywhere that I've ever worked before I came to Zingerman's. What a trial shift is that you literally have the person come in and work a shift. That shift might be 4 hours, it might be 6 hours, and you treat them as an independent contractor, and you pay them at the end of the shift, whether they whether you're going to hire them or not. So it's before the hiring decision, but you give them an experience of what it is to do the job, and it gives you an experience of them performing the job. Now, one of the things that Deli always does is, when they're doing front of the house people in the restaurant, is they bring them in on a football Saturday. And anybody that's been to Zingerman's Deli on a football Saturday gets pretty crazy. So we don't like let them go off by themselves. We pair them up with somebody that's experienced, but they are getting an experience of what it's really like to work there.
Right. And there's a lot of opportunities to clear tables and empty garbage and do things that are a part of the job. And you can get a sense of, do they move, are they moving quickly? Are they taking initiative? Are they holding back? Are they asking questions?
I think too that a trial shift, this is from my life as a deli manager, what we experienced in the trial shift was being in the physical space that they're going to work in. We've had people say at the end of a trial shift, wow, I can't do this every day.
Right?
Because that's important. The physical space is important. I think we shortchange that, but because we're so used to the environment when we're interviewing. But
right, and people they think they want a job, and they want, and they're I don't think they're being they're lying. They think they want to do that, and then they think, oh, it'll be fine. We had when ZingTrain was at our old office, we our copy machine was in the basement. We were hiring an administrative assistant, and a lot of the job was making copies, and it was in the basement. So we had people come in and do a trial shift, and there were a couple people that just like, I mean, they didn't specifically say, no, not the basement. But, you know, it was clear that it wasn't as romantic as they thought working at ZingTrain was going to be. But I wanted them to know that.
I'm going to interject with a quick question about trial shifts.
Yes.
Workers' comp insurance for injuries on trial shifts, how does that whole thing?
So, knock on wood, we haven't really had that issue. So they're not employees, so they would be covered under our general liability insurance. I mean, I think what we would do if we ever had a serious injury, which hasn't happened, thankfully.
We try not to put people in situations
Exactly.
where that would happen.
But you can always hire them, and that's their first day of work, and then they are covered if they're employees. That's what I would say about that.
Okay.
I did notice that quite a few people who signed up for the webinar mentioned that you do some form of a trial shift or have people come in, and that is something that is working for you.
Yeah.
So,
We have questions piling up, experts. I hope you're ready.
We're ready.
Okay. One sort of family of question is this separate fact from fiction. You know, there's the authentic person versus the interview person. What do you do to make sure that what you're seeing is the real person?
Well, I'm sure Pat has several things to mention here, but one thing we do is really gets back to trying to see them in the environment that's as close to the work environment as possible. So if they're not going to have a quiet office to work in, don't have the interview in a quiet office. Have it in the middle of, where a lot's going on. If they need to come to work, if they're working a night shift, then they need to show up at 1 or 2 in the morning. You might want to think about having an interview at 1 or 2 in the morning, because the fact that they can be on time at 2 in the afternoon isn't necessarily relevant. If you need them to be on time at 2 in the morning and to be sharp at that particular point in time.
The other thing that this is where I think you get into the entire hiring process, and where you're going to have multiple exposures to the candidates. One of the things I think I mentioned earlier on is our online application system allows us to ask job-specific questions that are part of the application. So that's our first exposure to them and how they answer questions and what they say. And then there might be a pre-screen, and then there's an interview, and then there's maybe a second interview, and then there's a trial shift. And so you kind of look at them through the course of the entire process, and are you seeing consistency there? Also different exposures from different people bringing different perspectives is going to help. I tell you, it's so interesting to sit in those debriefs from a tilter world, because different people have asked the candidate different questions, and what ends up happening is you piece together sort of this picture of the candidate, and things that don't seem something seems a little bit off there. And then the final step that I highly encourage is reference checking. I really do encourage reference checking, and I tell, if somebody can't come up with 3 people that will talk about them and be willing to talk about them, it might not be a supervisor, but because a lot of companies don't want to do references, that's another issue. I mean, you can always find people that have worked with you that are willing to talk about your work performance. And that's another way to do it.
We also do credit checks for people who are going to be in positions where they are handling money, or just are really responsible for making decisions for the organization. It's not a absolute, make or break, because there can be legitimate reasons that people have had challenging things on their credit history, but it's information. It's just data.
Question here about phone screening, just examples of phone screening questions, and then what are good entry-level phone screening questions?
Well, I'll give the example that I was sharing with these guys as we were starting. We got about 120 applications for the last position that ZingTrain posted for, which was an events administrator. And so I went through the applications and I did phone screens on probably 20 or 25 people. And one of the questions I asked was, okay, you've got the job. You're coming in. It's a seminar morning. And you get here at about quarter to 7. You unlock the door. You know participants are going to start arriving around 7:15 or 7:30. And when you walk in, there's water all over the floor. What do you do? And I didn't have anything completely, certain things that I felt like they had to say. But it was very interesting. People broke into two camps. The ones who immediately started thinking about who were they supposed to call about problems with the roof, and the ones who were all about taking care of this right now to make it safe and make sure we're going to be able to have the session and we let the presenters know, and then we'll have to figure out how to get the roof solved. So I would say think about what are some of the things you need. These people, what are decisions they'll be making?
I just pulled up the one we used because it's like, wow, what do we ask? What attracted you to apply? So why are you even applying? And then tell me about your experience, the specific experience, the specific job you're looking to hire. What are your short and long-term goals? We asked a little bit about technical skills, computer skills, those kind of things. The other one that I actually use is, which isn't always appropriate to use, so it's specific to the situation. I actually ask about compensation. And I will tell you why. Because so the jobs I've hired for in my department have been payroll positions. And what I'm able to offer somebody and what somebody might get if they go to a Fortune 500 company and work in the payroll department is not always the same. And so I don't want to waste their time and I don't want to waste my time if the compensation range is really seriously out of sync. So I have found that asking that question is a good way, because remember what you're trying to do with the phone screen. A phone screen, you really are trying to say, does this person go to the next step, or do they get stopped right here? You're not really trying to say, is this the right candidate? You're trying to say, is this a qualified candidate that you want to go to the next step? And if they want to make, $20,000 more than you have to pay, then realistically, they might be a qualified candidate, but they're not going to be a real candidate because they're not going to be able to, they're not going to be happy with what you have to offer.
I'll add something real quick to the specific, the entry-level phone screen, because one of the things I learned after the fact at the deli was when we asked, why did you apply for this job? At an entry-level retail job, it's a perfectly legitimate answer, I need a job. I want to make my rent. And we're not that kind of place. We demand more than, we require a certain level of engagement. And so that was one of those after the fact aha moments when someone said, I'm just looking for a paycheck. To make it explicit, this is not the easiest way to make one.
Right.
There are
I would guess that a lot of times, though, what you heard was, I have a friend who works here,
yes,
and told me
exactly.
it's a great place to work,
Yeah.
and I should apply.
Yeah.
And that
a thumbs up.
Yep. That's something that we like to hear.
Yes. So many good questions. There's a couple here about how do we attract the right people for the interviews, or what avenues are we using to recruit people?
So we do a number of things. We are now online. We have an online application system where we work with the company that provides us that service, and it is like they're coming right to our website. It's all our graphics, it's all of our stuff. You get to it from any of our business websites or from our Zingerman's community website, and so we post there. It is also a online application system that allows us to post on a number of free, Craigslist, Indeed.com. There's a number of free resources out there. We do occasionally pay for ads. That is not our typical way of most of the hiring that we do. If we're hiring for very specific skills, like when we're hiring, in the Department for People, we're going to go to the professional association and post the job there. Some of it is informal. We are using LinkedIn. So LinkedIn and joining groups in LinkedIn is another way that you can do it. We used to have a sort of a flyer about our job openings, but since online application, we've stopped doing that. But what we do have is we have business cards that we can give to people that when they're in as customers say, hey, I'd really like to explore a job, that shows them how to get onto the system so that they can see what jobs are out there.
Those are also there for the frontline staff to give people when someone comes in and says, I want to apply for a job. They can give them one of those cards, and it has all of the info on how to go online and apply.
Yeah. Those are the biggest ones. We do specialized stuff when we need to.
For mail order for the holidays, don't they?
We've tried a number of things. We've tried radio advertising. We have some relationships with nonprofits. We've done a number of different things, and it's one of those things that we just keep working on. Because there's never like, okay, we've arrived. We've got all the different places that we need to go to. We're always on the horizon for new things.
And we're always hiring. I mean, I can't remember the last time. It's been a long time since
2008.
No one was hiring at all.
While we're on the topic of mail order, there's a question here about what you do differently if you're hiring seasonally. It's only 6 to 8 weeks. What are you trying to attract? Or what if your employee pool is teenagers, because that's kind of what makes sense. So sort of a short-term hire or a young.
Well, in terms of the short-term hire, that mail order is the perfect example of that, because they hire 250 to 300 people just for the 6 weeks around the holiday season. And they have refined that process through the years. They do a really good job with it, and they basically built in multiple touches and multiple interviews in one interview. They typically, the last couple of years, they've done 2 job fairs, if you will, days when they announce that people should come, they should have completed the application before then, and come in with all of the paperwork they would need to get hired, and that's the first qualifier. If they arrive and they don't have their 2 forms of ID and all of that, that's a send away right there. And then there are they're interviewing for the call center. Then there are some specific skills tests like typing, sitting on the phone skills, that sort of thing. And each time it's a funnel. Do you pass this? Then you move on. If not, you're sent over to the thanks but no thanks.
And Meg, even the warehouse, they do skill tests. And the skill tests are literally specific tasks that they are going to do.
Right.
When they're an employee.
Because we're not going to have as much time to help them develop that skill.
Right.
Correct.
So can you read the standard operating procedure that says go to this bin and pull these products and put them over here. And then they watch and they time them. And do they, can they do it?
There's sort of a family of questions about the thing that you can't see in the interview. So how do people function under pressure? Do they have a sense of urgency? And I know part of our answer is a trial shift, but are there sort of questions is there a way to address it in an interview setting? I guess is the sort of question.
The behavioral question in terms of tell me about a time when, or how would you handle, what would you do first, second, and third if you were met with this situation? And you have to realize that they don't know your business.
Right.
So, they're not going to answer as good as an employee who's been working there for a year would answer.
Right.
But you get some kind of sense from them about how they think, how they would act, and how they would respond. I try to stay away from how do you do under pressure? Oh, I do great, thanks. Because that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. But this is where preparation and involving people that are actually doing the job can help you design questions that really are insightful and provide insightful answers by candidates.
I wonder if this is the point where I should put in the big disclaimer, which is, interviewing can only do so much. And whether this is not, I don't think we have any stats to show this, but Ari likes to say that even with the best interview questions and the most experienced interviewers, 60% is pretty good. If 60% of your hires work out really long term. At the end of the day, the interview is just one piece of that employment life cycle, and then you bring them on and help them be successful.
And that's really where the next step of it is. How are you going to orient them? And how are you going to evaluate them early on? And I really look at that as sort of framing it for them once they get there, helping them be successful by being clear with expectations. And then if they're not meeting the expectations, addressing it early. And addressing it early and often and taking it to a conclusion. That conclusion being that they're able to fully perform the job, or they're not, and then you go another direction and they're not in that job.
Really quick question. What stage are we doing the background checks and credit checks in the hiring process? Is it before the interview, after the interview?
No, we don't do background checks. We do credit checks only for some specific management and financial positions, and that is
so we might do that
late in the process.
Yeah, if we were inviting 3 candidates in for a tilt-a-whirl, we might do credit checks at that point. Or no,
I'm thinking usually it's once we have maybe a tilt-a-whirl. I think we usually do it once we've got to the final 1 or 2 candidates, and we make sure that there's not any big surprises in there. Just if they have a little bit of an issue, we'll talk to them. By law, you have to talk to them about it. And that's, and so you want to talk to them about it and give them a chance to explain, and then make your decision from there. And this is sort of a, not exactly on this topic, but it came into my mind, so I want to mention it. One thing you want to make sure that you do whenever you have your final 1 or 2 or 3 candidates and you've got your top pick, when you make that person the offer, do not turn down any other candidates that you think might fit if the top candidate turns you down, because then otherwise you're going to have to start all over. And so when you're giving them a time frame, make sure that the time frame is enough, that you can make an offer to that top candidate, give that top candidate a little bit of time to make a decision, and then go to a second candidate if that first candidate, if that first candidate turns you down, without it being really obvious to that second candidate.
Right, that they're really not your top choice.
We're sort of getting to the end here, so what I want to ask is an overall question that I think captures a lot of the questions. Maybe each of you could answer it in turn. So I think the question is, we've talked about different aspects of the hiring process, a phone screen, interview, a second interview, a trial shift, a tilt-a-whirl. just talk a little bit about the decision-making process. And, you know, does this job need a phone screen or does it not? Does it need a trial shift? Does it not? Does it need a tilt-a whirl or just a second interview with another set of people? You know, sort of how you go through that.
I think it's, I mean, at the end of the day, like everything here, it's thinking about the bottom line impact. And so how, you know, if it's a position that only comes open once every couple of years, and then I think it's really worth investing, making sure you get the right person in there. And if it's a position that has skills that are hard to find, that's worth a big investment. If it's a entry-level position where you typically have a lot of turnover, you sort of can handle that level of turnover, and it's not as risky to bring somebody in and have them not work out in a month, then maybe you don't take as much time in the process.
You know, I totally agree with everything Maggie said. And the other thing that I would add is learn from your experience. So I have actually, in almost 7 years, I've filled the payroll job, I think 3 times, maybe 4 times. I think it's 4 times actually. And I can tell you, I learned a tremendous amount in each process, and you learn something every time you do it. And so make sure that you are thinking about, okay, what did I do? Was it enough? What did I miss? What can I do to make sure I get that?
Right.
And learn from that process, so that you can make your process better going forward.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, if you're satisfied with the results you're getting, stick with that process. If you're not, here are some ideas of things that you might want to try differently.
And with 1 minute to go, if you have a burning question, I apologize if we didn't get to your question, and please do email us at ZingTrain@zingermans.com, and we will try to get as many of those questions answered as we can. I will be sending out a recording of this and the PowerPoint, and also you guys gave us some great information, so we'll be sharing that back with you. So we have interviewing tips that all of you came up with and your favorite questions, so we'll give you access to those. And for those of you who found the 1 hour as way too brief, just like we did, come to the seminar, Working with Zing. It's June 17th and 18th, and the first 10 people to email ZingTrain@zingermans.com will get $250 off. So you can come to the seminar for $1,000. It's a great seminar. They do what they just did for,
come see us in person.
2 days.
For 2 days.
They both have great taste in clothes, I'm just saying.
Thank you all very much for being here. Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.